right, welcome everybody. Again, Revelation made easy, no longer prophecy. It is now particularly about revelation made easy. Who thinks Revelation's easy? For those online, nobody put their hands up. There you go. That's proof of the room of 20 odd people. Nobody in this room thought Revelation is easy.
It's easy to read.
Yeah. Easier to read black and white words. Brilliant. That's about as much easiness that we find out of it, isn't it? What we're trying to get across for the next 4 weeks is some tools and techniques and ways to read it that will help you feel more confident, feel that it is pretty easy, like most of the other prophecies. And then once you've got that in hands, maybe you can do what we've done and go away and come up with a good conclusion for yourselves. This is what Revelation might mean to you. So, shall we go through some memory lane?
Memory lane, let's do it.
Right.
Okay.
Can we just ask first?
Yeah.
So, is Revelation easy?
Sorry?
Is Revelation, if we ask you the question, is Revelation easy?
Yes.
Okay.
We wouldn't be here otherwise.
Well, just
It's, yeah. Structurally, it's easy. Getting into the detail of certain things can still be a bit of fun, but yeah, the bones of it, I think is actually quite easy. Hopefully. Yeah.
Over here.
So the problem is we're on screen.
Yeah.
So
I've got a personal space. Anyway, if you two want to sit down the back, that's perfectly fine. You can be your own separate group for the night. Your tables. If you did listen to us in your tables 8 weeks, I know it's a long time ago. It's going to be pretty difficult. 9 weeks ago, discuss your tables, what we talked about 9 weeks ago. What were the 4 tools that we talked about to understand?
yeah.
Come on.
it's a great.
You guys online too, what will answer some of these questions? Chat it if you want.
That was in week. So if you remember in week 1, we talked generally from ways we stand something. About 4 different we can understand.
Sorry?
Laura. Okay.
Oh yes, did you like Ron's pyramid and talk about
And then I
aliens?
thought another one must have been when the explanation is given.
What? Yes.
I don't know what Ron would call that, and that would be top of my list.
Yeah. Does people know what Jamie's talking about?
Well, so Jackie just said, so she remembers like the hypothesis, or what we might say guesswork, even if it's educated. And then the other one is one where the answer is kind of crystal clear given. So what do we call that?
Direct statement.
Direct statement. So cool, that's cool. So anybody think of an example of a direct statement? Daniel
Statue.
Yep, there was what we looked at one in there that was like a very direct statement in there. And I said it was one of the only ones that had a direct statement, and I think people found that very challenging, as though I was trying to challenge the whole concept of Nebuchadnezzar's image. But it was more about saying that when you look at it, there's only one direct statement as far as those empires go. And that was, you, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of God. And then after that, they are quite direct, even though.
It was something to do with one of the things related to it, which is trying to determine what was literal and what was figurative.
Yeah.
Just don't know.
Sort of. So, like, I think the easiest way to think about it, a lot of our statement of faith is built upon prophetical statements that are direct statements. For instance, of Jesus, it says, he shall sit on the throne of his father David and rule over the kingdom of Israel forever. And of his kingdom there shall be no end. Now, that's a pretty direct statement. There's nothing ambiguous about that. There's no symbols. You don't, you know, and it also has one of those things which we call the challenge of eternity. Of his kingdom there shall be no end. So that's a good direct statement.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the answers anyway. You've all got them. Cool. Same to you guys online, and I think we would agree we'd put them in these orders too when we're wrong.
Yeah, inferred conclusions, though, can be really strong when they're built on direct statements. So it's not really that order, but when you've got a direct statement, that's like your anchor point. You can just pin that down and build everything around it. So inferences can be built on direct statements, parallel passages.
They're really good when you can use like 2 or 3 at the same time. So
I think we as Christadelphians use parallel passages a lot. You know, that's what we enjoy about the Bible.
and hypothesis.
Yeah, we do that.
All right. How about week 2? Do you remember, what are we going back? 7 weeks? No, 8 weeks ago. What did we do in week 2?
Structure. What have we talked about there? Is it up there? Yeah.
Yeah, yep.
7 stages of structure.
Ron did this, so he might have gone on it really quickly or really longly.
Yeah. So
Get them to check in their groups again. Have a chat again. What are the 7 stages of the structure of prophecy for Israel? Same with you guys too. What do you think are the 7 stages of Bible prophecy? Chuck it in the chat. If you come up with 4 or 5, I think you're much better than these guys. Oh yeah, Ruth got it. If Nicker and his Ruth.
yeah.
Yeah, third statements. That's the good one there too.
Cool. On to it, I think. Oh, yeah. Very good. You guys online, remember what the 7
Stages, things, steps.
That's long enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Righto, that's long enough.
Since these guys down the back have been really quiet, should we go there first?
Okay, let's go down the back. Give us what you think, sort of how it might go.
Circle of life. People turn their back on God, and then God provides either someone who's got a good heart or a prophet to bring them back to God, and what they have to do is to restore themselves to God.
That's excellent, because we did. That's exactly. If you remember, we did talk about the 7 stages. It's not just about Israel; it's about God's purpose with humanity.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Yeah.
It's
What I
really
like
good.
with Cheryl is how she's made it her own too. So you've actually come up with a very similar cycle, and it's become your own sort of interpretation of it. That's real cool.
Anybody key things about the cycle which keeps repeating all the time? There's things in that cycle.
We got 6.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you get?
We got sin,
Yes.
then oppressor,
Yes.
suffering,
Yes.
a cry, the help of
Yes.
supplication,
Yes.
and then a deliverer. Well, he hears first. You get those?
Chuck it in there, see if you get 7.
Hears, deliverer, and peace.
Yes. Well, a raise, like in Judges, there's a raising up of the deliverer, and then there's the big,
Bring it up.
let's bring it up. Yeah. So there's kind of two big events that happen in the cycle, isn't there? So basically you have sin, negligence, disregarding of God's word, and then there's like the space invader. God sends an invader, and if you remember, that was always when God judges because of sin. The first judgment always comes in the form of a physical nation. So he raises up a nation against them. So it's like the physical arm of flesh which judges them. And if you think about that in the cycle, I like a good example is like, when Israel disobeyed God in the wilderness, they wanted flesh, so he gave them flesh. And in this, like when you're disregarding God, you're asking for flesh, so God says, okay, I'll give you what you want. So the invader comes, there's always a period of judgment. And that period differs, but the key thing about the period of judgment, it's always determined upon number 4.
Judge what? Judgment.
Judgment?
Yep.
Yeah. The oppression or the period of judgment or oppression is determined by number 4. When Israel repents, the time of oppression stops. If they don't repent, the time of oppression keeps going. So the time of oppression is determined by repentance. And as I say, then God intervenes because of repentance, and there's normally a raising up now of, or God's hand is now seen. God's hand is revealed through a miraculous way. And there's normally an enormous big battle. That's the big slam down. Boom. And then it's back to peace. Yes, yes, a great invention.
We haven't invented a deliverer. That's good spotting, Steve. Unfortunately, on record, we might have to buffer this bit out. Anyway, week 3, 6, 7 weeks ago, however many weeks ago, we talked about layering, didn't we? So you can see how it's a common technique in film, in books, the media, photographs, reporting, etc. All these sort of literary styles use it as a technique of writing and delivering a message. A few questions there for you. Then we kind of discussed this, I think we did.
Did we?
What's the authorism? What is God trying to demonstrate to us when he uses layering? And what are some common Bible techniques or tools that show us where layering is used? Give it a go in your groups again.
Yeah, some real basic examples of layering where you see it, and whether it's quite a lot of it in the Bible.
Yeah.
What about you guys there? I think a good one which is really obvious is really the Gospels.
Yeah.
Gospel records. Let's take the easiest example is the Gospels. So the Gospels is 4 accounts of the same person or same piece of history, but they've all had, we know through the faces of the cherubim, they all approach it from a different perspective. So it's told 4 times, but it's the actual same historical event viewed from different perspectives. So that's what's been something that's been repeated, but actually the same event.
So promises to Abraham and patriarchs.
Yep.
Told the business around the same.
Oh, very good, very good. Excellent. What about dreams? Think about, people that had dreams. Often they had the same dream told slightly differently, didn't they? We looked at Joseph with Pharaoh.
I think these guys have got some good answers. They've got the chat going on.
Over here, what's this table got?
This table.
Yeah.
Go, Jared.
The land days, sun, moon, and stars, and dreams.
Fantastic.
See, they were really good ones, because if you remember with layering, what we looked at, we used an example of one Old Testament prophecy, and we used those two examples as key things. Remember what that one was? Remember that prophecy? It's like the mini apocalypse, I call it. It's like the mini revelation, because it's only 3 chapters, but within those 3 chapters, it tells the same story 3 times. So it tells the same story 3 times, and you know it's the same story because it has the same markers. It's got the anchor points, the great and dreadful day of the Lord, and the sun becoming dark, and the moon turning to blood, and it happens 3 times. Different perspective. If you remember, we talked about in chapter, the first couple of chapters, the perspectives on Israel, and then there's a very short perspective on the remnant, and then there's another one, that's chapter 3, which is on the nations. So 3 times it tells the same story. It's layered.
On the law of Moses, and then it's replaced by the law of Christ.
Yeah. So shadows and fires.
And another one was about the doves at Jesus' baptism. Is one of my 8-year-old children on Sunday. Well, that's the same as the I was
Yep. So that's kind of parallelism in the sense that it's not exactly the same event, but it has got the same lesson behind it. So that's parallelism in terms of thought and connection with symbols. But like the idea behind layering is it's the same thing being told over again. So very similar. Excellent.
Probably a good one to get the grasp of, though, because as we look at Revelation, we see that layering is kind of crucial to get the main gist of what's going on there, wouldn't it be?
Yeah.
So what's the answer to what is the author demonstrating to us when he uses layering?
Different perspectives, Jackie. From, it might be looking at from Israel's point of view on an event, to Babylon's point of view on an event, to an individual's point of view on an event, right? So God's trying to demonstrate all these things going on about a single event or time, etc.
And it's really interesting, you know, like I like having done Hezekiah, I think it's fascinating in the story of Hezekiah that God's got this message direct to Hezekiah and direct to the nations, but then he's got another one where he tells the story direct to Sennacherib. And he answers Sennacherib and he says, who are you talking against? And it's like, why does God want to tell Sennacherib? So he tells Sennacherib the same story, but it's a different perspective. You know, what he's told Hezekiah is quite different to what he's telling Sennacherib, but it's about the same event that's about to happen. So he repeats the history or the prophecy. Cool.
Last one. Ron likes this thing because it's got his little doodacky.
Multiple applications.
There you go.
What are multiple applications? What that we did on
Short-term and long-term fulfillment.
Yeah. Yep. So prophecy like has a lot of that, doesn't it? It has a lot of, you know, things where it has meaning for the people in the day, and they can see it in the day, and then it has a long-term fulfillment, and often it has, you know, kind of historical fulfillment as well. That's ongoing. Yep.
What's the key feature, as in the key feature that shows that it's often a future fulfillment? Sorry. yeah. But what has not happened yet? The kingdom, the return of Christ.
Yeah.
Probably more specifically, is the return of Christ.
So so when you see prophecies that kind of finish with the glory or the return of Christ, it's like, you know, the antenna should go up and look at this as, you know, the whole context in a future application. You don't have to actually cut it in half and say, well, it's only this bit, because the Bible does that a lot. Like the entire prophecy has dual applications. Lots of the ones, you know, in Isaiah which speak about Hezekiah are all about Jesus. You know, we know they're all about Jesus, but they had an application to Hezekiah.
Yeah. So I think, like, we spent a long time in memory lane, but what we tried to kick in is a bit of what we looked at for the last 4 weeks 9 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But what we really came to a pretty good conclusion with it ourselves was how we saw the Old Testament came right into the Olivet, didn't it? It almost funneled in to
Yes.
focus on the Olivet prophecy itself.
It's like this is the first New Testament prophecy, isn't it? The Olivet prophecy.
Yeah.
So this is the big one where you take all of those Old Testament prophecies and all of a sudden you've got one now in the New Testament. And what we want to kind of see is that the Olivet prophecy is actually like that springboard. It bounces back to the Old Testament and it's going to bounce into Revelation. And some of the key things we looked at was, all of that language out of Joel, the sun be darkened, the moon turn into blood, and a big earthquake, and judgment, and Jerusalem being scattered. That's all in the Olivet prophecy. But that's all in Zechariah, that's all in Joel, that's all in Daniel. It's all in Ezekiel.
Yeah.
So all of that language, which is about the future things, is all in the Olivet prophecy. And we said the reason we knew the Olivet prophecy, no matter how people look at it, has a future application is because it's got those little things like Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And yet all of those Old Testament prophecies talk about a future treading down. Zechariah chapter 14, the city's going to be taken. Oh, there's going to be a big judgment on Jerusalem. So you know that there's a future treading down, yet the Olivet prophecy says Jerusalem will be trodden down of the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. There's your date stamp. And the other one, of course, there shall be a time of trouble such as never was, nor ever shall be, is kind of one of those challenges to eternity. There's nothing worse than this time, is there?
Unless the author doesn't know, I don't know what's coming before or after, but around that time, it's very hard to explain outside the realms of never was, never will be. This is going to be an incomprehensible event to understand that it's ever going to happen.
I've done more for this group of people than any other president has ever done.
Okay, so one person can kind of, he can almost get there. Yeah. The cool thing about the Olivet prophecy as well, that I like, is like the disciples have this particular question to Jesus, like, when's it going to happen? And his main response is, well, all these things are leading up to a sign of my return. So that's the key to me, that the Olivet prophecy is particularly about the return of Jesus.
And it has some key, like, direct statements in it.
Yeah.
It has a lot of the symbols which we find in the Old Testament prophecies. As we said, Jesus uses a lot of language of the Old Testament prophecy, and he uses statements about how he's going to return. So we'll lay down a little bit of or people can do this now. We could actually do this as a group, eh?
Okay, let's do it as a group.
Let's do it as a group.
Right.
So where can we find the Olivet prophecy? Anywhere else? Mark 13 and no, you had it right first time, really good. Luke 21. So what were one of the things that we said, when the disciples said, what will be the sign of your coming? What is the, like, Jesus talked about a lot of signs, but he talked about a number that were general, and then he started to get into some that were actual signs, so that they should look out for. So what were the signs that he said not to be overly concerned about, that aren't necessarily the sign?
Famines, earthquakes, nation rising against nation and kingdom against kingdom.
Yep.
That's the beginning of the fact.
Yeah, and he actually says, and then the end shall not be, because they've asked when shall the end. So he's saying, well, these things are going to happen, but
And we've always had those.
and we've always had those. So he's saying, like, when you see disturbances and famines and earthquakes, these aren't necessarily the sign of the end, are they? They're just general signs. But then he starts talking about a couple of specific ones.
Destroying the temple,
Yes.
abomination and desolation, set up where it shouldn't be.
Yes. So, and I think Dave's right in the sense that that's actually the first one, because remember, it's the whole Olivet prophecy starts with the subject of not one stone shall be left upon another that shall be thrown down. So this is what caused the disciples, they looked at the beautiful temple that Herod had made for them, that had been built by the Romans, and said, oh, this is lovely. And Jesus said, well, the time is coming when not one stone shall be left on another that shall be thrown down. So yes, the destruction of the temple is one of the signs that he starts the Olivet prophecy on. Very good.
In actual fact, it's interesting that's two questions, isn't it? One is when will the temple be destroyed and when will you come? Because those are the two, if you look at chapter 24, couple of verses carefully, you'll see that's what they're asking. Two questions.
Do you think though, David, just like, I mean, that's a good point, but do you think in their mind, they saw these two things separately? I mean, like, you know, you think about the disciples, they believed Jesus was about to set up the kingdom right there and then. That's why Peter, only a few hours later, was taking up a sword. He thought it was time to fight. And even after his resurrection, in Acts chapter 1, they says, now at this time will you restore the kingdom to Israel. So they saw this one event that was going to happen, not seeing it as the death and resurrection of Jesus. They saw that, you know, the kingdom and the destruction of the Romans and the kingdom of Messiah was one event. So I don't know whether they were.
Yeah, personally, when they asked the question, they saw it.
Yes.
But then when Jesus explained it, or when Jesus gives them the discourse, they see it as two separate things. Maybe they might not have seen that straight away. Certainly would have seen it.
Cool. Nice. So that's a good one, destruction of the temple.
Persecution.
See, yeah. Now, actually, in the recent just put up the abomination of desolation connected with the destruction of the temple, because it says when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then you'll know. So that's one of the key signs. Is when you see this event, you'll know. Luke doesn't mention the abomination of desolation. Luke says something else instead of the abomination of desolation. Anyone know what Luke says instead of it? He doesn't use that phrase, but he says,
Jerusalem would be surrounded by armies.
excellent, Ruth. Very good. So,
Andrew.
yes, Ruth and Andrew. Brilliant. So that's very interesting in itself. So this phrase, the abomination of desolation, in Luke's gospel is when you see Jerusalem surrounded with armies. Then you'll know that it's really time to get out because it's going to get bad. Any other things in there that you can see as direct signs?
The sun will be dark and the moon will not give its light and the stars will fall out of the sky.
Yep, that's cool, isn't it? Sun darkened, moon turned to blood, and the stars will fall out of the sky. Pretty graphic sort of language.
It's a direct statement that says the gospel was to be preached in the whole world.
Really good, like that one, Ruth. So it does say with the gospel, this gospel will be preached in all the world, and then the end shall come. So that's another one of the key signs, is the preaching of the gospel to all the world. Yes, so there'll be many false Christs coming, showing signs and wonders, saying I am he. But then he says, don't believe them. And why won't you be deceived about false Christs? What does he say? He says, you'll see many false Christs coming, saying, I am he, or that he's in the desert, or that he's appeared in a secret place here. But don't believe them, because he tells them another sign, which is another key sign to the story of the Olivet prophecy. Sorry? The what? Excellent. It is. It's the way he's coming. How's he coming? It's in the Olivet prophecy. How does he come? Very visibly. What does it say? Yes. So what he's, yeah. So what he's saying is when he comes, there'll be no mistaking. It's not about, oh, he's appeared in secret over here, or he's over here, or somebody says, I am the Christ. This is when you see the sign of the Son of Man coming in clouds. That's the sign. It's a visual, graphic demonstration that when he appears, there won't be any mistake.
I think Matthew 24, verse 27, where the lightning comes out of the east, shineth even under the west, so shall be coming of the Son of Man be. So that obvious.
Yeah.
I think just on that one, I know it's not a big deal, but my dad used to, he was of the opinion that the lightning, rather than being a flash of lightning which is gone and blink and you might miss it, which you blinked at the time while you're in another room and in the basement, you can see it, but rather, lightning doesn't necessarily go from east to west, but the sun does. So it's plain as day. And it'll be there, you know, not just like that and gone, but just a thought.
Yeah. So that sign, by the way, coming in clouds, it is a real interesting little theme to follow through. It's, you know, it's kind of everywhere. He's coming in the clouds of glory. Revelation starts, you know, he's coming in clouds. Every eye will see him, even those who pierced him. So even Revelation 1 starts, boom, straight in off what he's already said. I'm coming in clouds. Everyone will see me. You know, it's not going to be unmistakable. It's going to be visual. So that's the point. Do we have a timestamp?
Do you get a timestamp? Is there a timestamp in the Olivet prophecy?
The list of the fig tree.
Fig tree? That's good to put in the symbols. I like that one. Because he talks about fig tree as being a key lesson. Up in the symbol there.
I would have talked about a different timestamp. I listened to Peter Heaviside in Hong Kong on these prophecies, and he pointed out that the three of them are given at different times. It's a different kind of timestamp, all very close together, but he thinks the disciples are checking out the answers and reasoning out all the answers, and that's why they're slightly different. But the last time he's on the Mount of Olives, and the others he's in the city at the temple. So it's quite intrigued with that. But they're different timestamps.
Cool. So one of the things I want to do before we jump into we're going to get into Revelation proper, we're just about to do that, aren't we? Jump in. Just for a few minutes, and like I kind of would like you to just think about, and you can do this in your own time, about like clearly because of this phrase, when you see the abomination of desolation, Jesus is referring to only 3 possible places in the Bible. There's only 3 places that phrase is used. Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 9, and Daniel chapter 12 are the only 3 times that phrase is used. Now, it can be either referring to one or referring to all 3. Not going to go into detail, but we kind of show that all 3 of those prophecies have an end time fulfillment. I think it's all 3. But there's one other thing in this prophecy which really tells you where he's really referring to. And there can be no question of it. And what is it? That phrase which says, there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation. How many times does that appear in the Bible? The exact phrase was only used in one other place in the whole of the Bible, Daniel chapter 12, which has the abomination of desolation. Doesn't that stand out to you that the Olivet prophecy has a phrase which is only used in 3 places? One of them is Daniel 12, and another phrase which is only used in Daniel chapter 12. And I think there's your key to the Olivet prophecy. By the way, if you look and do a little bit of parallelism between those two, it's easy to go through Daniel chapter 12. I found about 10, 15 amazing direct connections between the Olivet prophecy and Daniel chapter 12. And one of the things that it says in Daniel chapter 12 is Daniel says, I don't understand this. I can't understand what you're saying. That's what he asked the angel. And the angel said, it's okay, Daniel. Seal up the book for the time of the end. It's not going to happen in your time. Seal it up because it's given for the time of the end. And then those who open will see the seals opened of this book will understand, because that's the time of the end. You, Daniel, will stand in your lot in the last days, which is exactly out of Matthew chapter 24. He that endures to the end shall stand before the Son of Man in his lot. So Jesus quotes that. So that's just a quick thing, but it's our springboard, because now we're doing.
Welcome back. What we think is the Old Testament has come into focus into the Olivet. All these things that we come up with here have come through from Old Testament prophecies. From Daniel, from Joel, from Ezekiel, from Isaiah. You can just point them out through numerous numbers of Old Testament prophecies, right? And they focus into the Olivet. It is all about me returning.
Yep. That's the ultimate end of the Olivet prophecy. No matter well, and because of the date stamps that are in there, and a lot of other reasons. So what we believe in this, in terms of the structure, is that using these tools, this time of trouble, such as never was, is the biggest event that will ever happen, and the detail of it is what the book of Revelation is about.
Yeah. We feel it goes through to Revelation, and Revelation is just more detail on the Olivet prophecy about the events of Christ's return. It's the time of trouble that never was and never will be.
So now we're going to get you to see if you can we're just going randomly into one part of Revelation at the moment, but this is just to serve a purpose. So remember when I said this book is shut up, Daniel, it's sealed till the time of the end. Revelation is about an unsealing. The word revelation means to reveal or to unveil. And the revelation has a lot of detail on 1 to 5, which leads to the big revealing of things about seals, which are now being opened. So remember, Daniel, it says, shut up the book till the time of the end. And then it says, those that see the seals will understand. That's why it says in Revelation, blessed is he that readeth and understands these words. That's why Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation, let him that readeth understand. Whereas Daniel said, I can't understand. He said, it's because it's not your time. Yep. So Revelation chapter 6 is the beginning of the seals. So what we want you to do in your groups is what?
We want them to read through Revelation 6, the opening of those seals, and just in that very chapter of the opening of the seals, see how many of these signs and symbols and statements,
concepts,
or concepts,
the structure
you can come up with directly between Matthew 24 and Revelation 6. So we'll give you, 5-10 minutes to do it.
Because this is the last exercise, so you got 10 minutes. So did everyone get that online? You're looking at Revelation chapter 6. I would say you can actually look at chapter 7 as well, but not really, like sort of. It's a bit of a teaser. So just stay in Revelation chapter 6 for the time being and see how many themes and structures you can see in just this one chapter that might be in the Olivet prophecy.
Do you guys here at the hall, you got the board as a bit of a help? Sorry guys, online you might, I don't know, maybe got your own notes to compare.
But if you've got something online, if you want to chuck it in the chat box, we'll put it up on the board, eh?
Yeah, by all means.
You're not allowed to yell it out, otherwise you'll be giving it away to the rest of the group. Sorry, Ruth. You don't have to use your typewriter.
What sort of techniques they're using here now? On the like layering or direct statements? What are they trying to use of the last 4 weeks that we talked about?
Hopefully they're looking, looking at parallel passages. So you're looking at parallel passages as a key one. Hopefully you're looking at structure. So you can, if you remember that structure, that theme, you can follow through that structure in this.
Signs and symbols too.
Signs and symbols, yeah.
Date stamping, yeah.
Some date stamping, signs and symbols.
Pretty much 3 of the 4 weeks, if not 4 of the 4 weeks that we've, those tips that we've brought forward, they can use here.
And as you go through and read it, if you think of any like real clear, direct statements in there, those challenges to eternity, direct statements.
We should too.
We should do it, eh?
Give a real quick answer. It's quite good. That's how it's really intense. Even online, you guys online have gone quiet. For creatures, they thunderous wolves. They've got thunder straight away. Second creatures say come. This fire red. There's this sort of the sun and the moon that's got blood fire. Right there, isn't it?
It's going to take peace from the earth. So this sounds like a bit of a time of bad things. So they killed one another with a great sword. I think it says sword. Like it says they should fall by the edge of the sword.
Even like mine, NET, so that people would worship one another. Isn't that graphic? There's your conflict.
Yeah, there's famines, wars. Yeah. Pretty big earth, right? Come on, sweet one.
Distinction between
yeah. Souls of those who have been slain and witness of God. That's it, don't be afraid. Some of you will lose your life one of these days. Yeah. It'll be ended over. Yeah. Big earthquake.
The fourth of the earth. Killing things, disease again.
The fig tree dead for fruit, the sky vanished away. Heaven sounds a great day. Rock was cut.
Yeah.
And I need to space and set it on the front. Then you'll see the fire.
There's 10 laying out there's some structure, there's some prophecy structure, crying out. Yeah.
I should be in either Luke chapter 21. Luke chapter 21.
All numbers reached. So there is a sense where there's an accomplishment there, isn't there? Where there's a full number being reached of both their fellow servants and their brothers who are going to be killed. So there's an end to it as well. A huge earthquake took place. The sun went black. Signified here, the full moon, blood red. Exactly the same phrasing from before.
Yeah, now where's this one come from, by the way? Direct quote. They, then the kings of the earth and the great ones will hide themselves in caves and the rocks of the mountains, fall on us and hide us. I think Jesus quoted that, but I'm not sure if it was actually no prophecy, it was just the order up to it. They have eyes and see. Look at that. Oh, let's see. There's one.
I don't see verses between that, sorry.
Relations.
Oh, look at the year. Here we go. Bruce got some good ones coming through now.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. It's good. Resting until the others are still resting. Ah, so good, I know.
What's the other one there, Bruce? Oh, yep. Spot on. The sun and the moon, etc. is exactly or similar to Matthew 29. True. Oh, that's cool.
It's a bit
You're right. It's something not later on. Yeah. Maybe she was back.
Okay, I'll let you read chapter 7, verse 1, just to actually join that and think about that one for a minute in terms of the Olivet prophecy.
It's similar.
Probably 1 and 3, 7 verse 1 and 3. Cool. Right. Shall we bring together and let's see how many we can put on the board. Shall we rub off and put on the board, and
Or should we just sort of write a verse or something beside them? So we can keep these up, just scribble up where it comes up in Revelation.
oh yeah, but there's a few extra ones, isn't there? But yep, what do we got? Who's start over this one? I will start with Ruth because she's got one. So she has Revelation 6 verse 11 and Matthew 24 verse 8 to 13 says has resting until others are killed, and compares with some being killed but need to endure longer to the end, which is kind of cool. Matthew 24 verse 8 to 13. Ooh. Right, what else we got? Yeah, so that's really interesting, isn't it? So you've got a big earthquake and the sun and the moon, and what does it have in Matthew? Something, it says there's a big shaking in the heavens, isn't there? And the sun becomes dark, and the shaking is so big that the stars fall from heaven. There's a massive shaking and the stars fall from heaven, the sun, and remember we looked and saw that that's language 3 times in Joel's prophecy.
Is there a star darkening and then they fall? Because on chapter 24, Matthew 24 verse 20, it says that they shall be darkened, and 6 verse 12 Revelation says I'll be tuned with blood. It seems to me to be dark as well. Then the next verse says they shall fall.
Yeah, so stars are toppling out of heaven and blood.
That the sky receding like a scroll is in Isaiah 34 verse 4, and that's what Jesus is quoting.
Nice. Well, yes, it's a parallel and a layer. Yep. So you're right. In Isaiah 34 verse 4, he talks about the sky being rolled up like a scroll. Very good.
We've got Revelation 6 verse 15, is in Luke 23 verse 20.
Yes.
They're hiding in the mountain. This is false.
And that's a direct quotation. That's really good. So that's a direct quotation that Jesus actually says when he's going to the crucifixion, and then the woman weeping, he says, don't weep for me, because the days are coming when they will begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and into the rocks, hide us. And then it's cited again in Revelation. So context, not quite the Olivet prophecy, but very much contextual by subject matter. So really good.
Verse 10, you've got, well, I don't know how exactly what these things to be, but verse 10, you've got people saying, how long before you come?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. They cry aloud, they're waiting.
Is the, sorry, second, what was the connection?
Verse 10.
The Matthew 24, but.
Oh, Matthew 24, verse.
Their question.
Well, it's a question. When will this happen? What will come? Verse 3, the first 3 verses of Matthew 24.
What about wars and famine? Was that not in the first couple of areas? One of the horses come out and he's given a sword, and he's to go and slay and to kill people with the sword. And Jesus talks in the Olivet prophecy about, the wars, the sword and the wars, and then there's famines.
Verse 13, the figs, isn't it?
And God's got earthquake as well.
God's got earthquakes, yep.
Well, no, singular earthquake, because obviously it's multiple.
Well, climax is in one big one though, because there's an enormous shaking which causes the stars from heaven to fall. So the Olivet prophecy climaxes with a mighty shaking, which is interesting. And you've got general earthquakes, but then you've got the one big one at the end. So
Any famines and things in Revelation 6?
Because they,
yep. And pestilence, which I think is also in the Olivet prophecy, isn't it?
People fleeing to the mountains.
Yep.
Chapter 24, verse 16, Revelation 6, verse 14.
And then I just said about Revelation 7, and Ruth's just made the connection that I thought was quite good, where it's Revelation 7 verses 1 to 3, is that there's four angels standing on 4 corners of the earth, and they're going to seal people in their foreheads in verse 3. And so at the end of the Olivet prophecy, it says he will send his angels to the 4 corners of the earth to gather together his elect. So you see, the beginning of chapter 7 is exactly the same as the Olivet prophecy, and the angels going forward to seal those in their foreheads. Any others? The fig tree is a good little connection in there, isn't it? The heavens. So
the falling of rocks, so that's true. That's starting to
even the last verse, look at that last verse and think about the Olivet prophecy, what Jesus' conclusion of the Olivet prophecy is. What does it say in that last verse of chapter 6? Well, the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall stand? Where does that come from? He that shall endure to the end shall stand before the Son of Man. Same words that he used to Daniel in Daniel chapter 12. So in Daniel chapter 12 and the Olivet prophecy, it talks about enduring to the end and being able to stand before the Son of Man, because it says, who can stand before the face of him and the wrath of the Lamb. So this is the face of the wrath of the Lamb seen in his throne.
Verse 10, how long until he come and judge? It's the same question that the disciples.
Yes? Yep. Alan? By the way, it's exactly also Daniel chapter 12. Daniel asks, how long till these things be? That's what he asked the angel, exactly the same thing. How long to the end of these wonders? He asked in Daniel chapter 12. So it's the same question in Daniel 12, it's the same question in the Olivet prophecy, and it's the same question that's being asked here. So there's your connection a little bit back to all of these things. So and you see the structure is very much similar. You've got a structure of really bad times. You've got horse going out, bringing judgment. It's so bad that people are losing their lives. And then all of a sudden, you've got this great day of the Lord coming. And in chapter 7, you've got a sealing of a remnant. So you see the structure in our structure that's laid out, which is exactly the same as the Olivet prophecy. Big time of trouble. It's going to be disastrous. But if you endure to the end, and then the angels are going to gather together the elect. Same structure.
I think we've comprehensively made some connections.
Yeah. Do you think there's reasonable connections into the Olivet prophecy and the opening of the seals in Daniel chapter 12? I'm kind of throwing those three things together, but you know, if you spend a little bit of time looking at that, because then what we hope to do is next week we want to come back and we want to start talking about layering, and we want to see how the same thing happens again and again. A slightly different focus, and again, same structure, but we're going to see that same pattern laid out, layered over top of each other over and over and over again. So all of that prophecy is all through Revelation. So, okay, so John.
You can begin to see that it's just an expansion on that prophecy. It's definitely talking about the future of Christ's return and the things that are surrounding it. Absolutely.
Just as a lot of prophecy is.
Yeah.
So,
shall we go to some conclusions?
Yeah. Okay.
Inference was also one of our tools or techniques to use. So if we're making these connections between Matthew 24 and our Revelation, what can we possibly start to infer between the two? I know it's only one chapter in Revelation that we've looked at. Hopefully in the next 3 weeks, we'll look at a lot more of it. What do you think we can start to infer?
Well, there's probably two things. One is the context of that and the other thing I mentioned before, because the detail of 24 is about, so it's quite interesting to look at the comparison that way. You know, you get more information and it's interesting to make those connections. It does actually feel a time of difficulty for some big event.
Yeah, it's pretty clear that, you know, like there is a time that's coming. If Jerusalem is going to go through what we know it's got to go through, then there's got to be a time of serious judgment and a time which brings God's wrath. So something's going to happen. Israel's going to upset God big time. They're going to really upset him for him to bring this level of judgment. So.
Revelation 107, the story has it all. Behold, he's coming with clouds, and every eye will see him, and those who pierced him.
Yeah.
Wow. So God was most upset when they crucified his son. So Jesus is coming back. And the revelation was given to Jesus to show his servants.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that point about it, all the tribes of the earth shall wail because of him. And when you get to chapter 7, it's a sealing of certain amongst all the tribes of Israel. There's 12 tribes, and it lists all the tribes that are.
it's amazing to think, you know, when you talk about the troubles that are going to come to Jerusalem, which are worldwide and fixed. When you go to Jerusalem and look at the area of land that it occupies, it's minuscule.
Yeah.
And to see that the whole focus is going to be in that minuscule amount of ground, the size of half a little short of orphan, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. And see, think that the amount of area that's going to be such a major
Mm. Ruth's got a bit of a question here. See what you guys think as well. Does this suggest that Revelation is purely future?
See, now that's a really good question. So that, and this is where, you know, like, what's your thoughts?
future from where?
Like future from us,
Yeah.
from now.
Future specifically for Christ's return? Or is there other interpretations to it, other generations that can look at it too?
Multiple. Well, the first few chapters are about specific churches, right?
Yeah.
So,
And-
it doesn't have an application for that church. Obviously, that's all.
Yeah.
I think that chapter 17, 18 and 19 would be.
She's asked particularly for Revelation 6 after we've done that tonight, right? Think about what we learned with layering and multiple applications too. So they're not just for the main event, aren't they? There's also the primary or the first fulfillment, and then the future fulfillment that goes into it.
But I think what I would say is that the biggest thing happens with Revelation is there's generally, by and large, the interpretation of Revelation falls into three categories. People that are known as preterists that believe that it was all written about events of AD 70 and it was written before AD 70. There is continuous historic that believe it's events from John's day forward because of the statement that says, I will show you things which must shortly come to pass. And then there is the futurist, which believes that Revelation revolves around future events. Now, from my side of things, where we're going to go, I don't have any problem with all of those. And I'm not just being, I'm not being PC about that. I've heard arguments about an early dating of this around AD 66, and there's really, really good arguments. And more recently, historic kind of evidence suggests that might be right. But I really don't, to me, that's not really my concern, because guess what, AD 70's come and gone. Even the continuous historic, I see real things when I've read the continuous historic to feel that there's something which is really encouraging. But I think the purpose of it, the real thing is there is definitely a future application, and this proves it. And so does the Olivet prophecy. And so it's like, well, you know, for me, it's like, I want to know, like the disciples, what shall be the sign of your coming? Are these things going to be? And if Revelation is a future application, rather than saying this bit's future or that bit's future and that bit's historical, look at the fact that prophecy has this ability to have multiple applications, and the entire prophecy, I believe, is future application. And when you see the structure, when you see the pattern, it's very clear it has a future application. So,
To me, isn't there a very much a very overwhelming principle in here as well? If we were told that return from Saviour, God, told, down the way. But that whole way of learning is looking at ourselves, that whole way of working, that whole way. So
obvious. I think this view, futuristic view, if it's real, all of a sudden things are going to become real clear as they fall into place. And they're going to be signs for the wise and the understanding and to help Israel repent. Because God's going to need witnesses to testify that these things are about to bring a time of judgment and trouble, and unless they repent, no flesh will perish. No, this nation will be destroyed. And for us that might understand that, we might be called upon to be witnesses both in the world, but to the nation of Israel. And there'll be those in Israel that we called upon. And I think Revelation will be like all of a sudden, all of these things, the future application will become crystal clear. I think, yeah. So I've been excited about it because I've kind of seen all these things and I sort of think, I can see the anchor points of what's going to happen, but if you would ask me, detail of it, I won't give you a hypothesis. I've got thoughts, but it's pointless me doing that. I think what we want to do is try to find the anchor points in Revelation. So these are the direct statements, this is the structure, these are the anchor points. And then the stuff, well, we can talk about, we can enjoy hypothesizing on those things together.
But you can see how easy getting to the anchor points is. This is like, we did this in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Ron's come to this point in what, 6 months, give or take, and he's helped us get to here in 20 minutes. But using the tips and the tools and stuff that we talked about in the first 4 weeks, we can then start to do more of those 20-minute steps to get more and more of those anchor points. So,
Yeah.
Like we've looked at buildings, but we found these that are similar. A lot of similarities and similarities of language. But similar doesn't necessarily mean the same. Which going back to 4 things at the beginning. There's a lot of language used in various prophecies. That is repeated through prophecies which we know about times. Especially if you look in the Old Testament, and in fact some of it's repeated. And the same language is used, if you start through in Deuteronomy and follow through the number of the other prophets through, even all that are fulfilled in Old Testament times, so pre-Jesus. They use similar language, even though they're unfolding. So, so we've collected similar language, but similar language we know doesn't mean the same as. So always.
That's why we need the anchor points. I agree with you. That's why we need the anchor points. And, like there is a really tremendous anchor point that brings all this good. Well, I'll leave that till next week. Maybe next week, maybe the week after. But it's kind of it's like an anchor point that just ties all this together, that that the similar language is more than just similar, same events. But there's a key little section in here that we will come to.
this is what we're doing next week, isn't it?
Layering.
Yeah.
Layering. So we're just going to show again, I suppose, the structure and the layers. And then I think in the week after we'll hone down on a couple of the direct statements and key anchor points, and basically say, I like your corner pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. If we can find them and they're rock solid, it's like, well, you can go anywhere else, but you can't deviate from these corner pieces because they're solid. They're the jigsaw puzzle. So, cool.
What they do in the news, they hang out like the really good points. So come back in 3 weeks' time and you'll get the good point.
What's that?
Try and do more of this if you want to. Absolutely. Put into practice some of those techniques and those prophecy tools and see if you can come up with more.
Like we were saying before on, like generally there's those 3 approaches we'll use on particularly relation, but obviously generally. you know, and I think some of them are not necessarily mutually exclusive. But I guess, you know, with the, you know, the preachers or the, you know, it's mostly 70, all of them will say Jesus is still coming, you know, and there's still prophecy about Jesus coming. I think that's, you know, that's agreed by all three views.
Yeah.
I don't think that gets debated, for sure. But with the preterists, you can look back to see if, because it's kind of put statement rather than like 80, 70, you know, you can look back at that and you can go, well, like, that's a historical event, like, we can measure against that, you know, I mean, with the historic approach, the continuous historic approach, because there's an application to a set of unfold, you know, because they're things, you can look at that and you can say, okay, well, these things seem to work, those things seem not to, you can, you know, measuring it against, okay, well, so the biblical language is this, and you're saying that that's talking about this event and these historic period construction points. But with the futuristic interpretation of this, which is what has been proposed generally, there's no anchor point, there's no reference like that to go, well, okay, well, how can we measure that against something, you know, like what we could do with the preachers with the 80-70, or continuous historic with the unfolding time periods. So, you know, there's a certain amount of not quite, even though we're all looking at the same biblical passages to compare, is it just similar languages or, you know, lots of stuff. You know, there is also like a, you know, not quite comparing and measuring the interpretations on quite the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a little bit like, you know, like if you're saying this is largely futuristic, then you can get away, I suppose, with being like Daniel to say, you know, I don't understand these things. And it's like, well, it'll be made apparent at the time of the end because it's not your time. So all things are made apparent in the end. And I think that's the thing, is that the futuristic does hold a certain amount of, you know, unknown. But it's all like, as I say, what we want to look at is the anchor points from the scripture, is use all the symbols that we can find in the background or the prophecies of the Old Testament and see if we can follow this structure and use the patterns to say, well, this really makes sense. Now, I don't quite know what the detail was in here, but the pattern makes sense and the structure makes sense. Because the problem with the other one, even whether it's 80-70, see, I've read not the whole of Eureka, but I did a lot of work on the continuous historic, and I have also done a lot of work on reading the preterist views of Harry Whittaker. Now, the problem with both is that once you start on something and you start looking at history and then saying, you know, like, you know, this is Revelation's about this, you start looking at how you can fit Revelation into what you're looking at. The history you're looking at is you're trying to say, now I need this to fit this. It's got to fit because I'm seeing this as preterist or I'm seeing this as continuous historic. So that's the other danger, is you're actually wanting to manipulate things to fit history. Even if they seem to fit really well, you've got to be really careful with that process. So the good thing about looking at the futuristic is I can't tell you the detail because it hasn't happened yet, but we can look at the anchor points. So we can look at structure, which to me seems like a very, you know, scriptural way to look at it. So.
Shall we stop recording? It's like an hour and a half and just carry on chatting.
I think we should probably finish.